Welcome back to the Horse Racing Network with me, Izzy Phillips, and I'm joined today by Paul Alster, and we're going to be taking a look at the best and the worst of the Cheltenham Festival 2025. Hi Paul, how are you doing?
I'm very well. Like your good self, I've managed to survive another Cheltenham Festival with the roller coaster ride that we had over those amazing 4 days. Still here to tell the tale.
I think surviving is probably the word most people would use after this Cheltenham Festival, because for something that has been a favourites wonderland for the past few years now, it really changed, didn't it? It felt very different, Cheltenham Festival. So we'll take a look at that best and worst, and we'll start on day one. And the best for you on day one, Paul, would you describe that as the champion hurdle?
Well, I think from the point of view of a spectacle, of what racing is all about, you couldn't get better than the chaos, the carnage, the drama of what was one of the most memorable champion hurdles of all time. Um, as I think we discussed when we did our preview, you should never be afraid of one horse, because they can, unfortunately, they can go wrong. They can trip up. The jockey can fall off. They can whip round at the start. Anything can happen. And in that one race, virtually anything that could happen did happen. And the emotions that we went through were extreme. But in the end, I think we got a wonderful story out of this year's champion hurdle. Seeing the crowd singing in the winner's enclosure to Jeremy Scott was a great moment of racing, and so unexpected. So well done indeed to him, and hopefully Constitution Hill, State Man, and all the others involved will be there at Punchestown, and we'll be able to have a rematch and see how it goes.
Yes, I think if you were in the eyes of competition, the champion hurdle was perhaps one of the best we've seen in recent years, in the sense that, like you say, it was so unpredictable. If you were on Constitution Hill, or wanting to see that kind of history-making moment that we spoke about in our preview, where he was going to, charge up the Cheltenham Hill by 20 lengths, it was the worst. For me, I think on the first day, Paul, if I was to go with the best, I think I'd have to go with the first race. I'd have to go with Copec de Boards.
Mm-hmm.
He, not only the fact that Sky Bet did incredibly well in giving up their name for the race and, entitling it wholly to Michael O'Sullivan, but for the emotions behind the owner of Copec de Boards being able to see his horse run after shortly before having treatment for kidney cancer. And he said that this horse was what kept him going. And then post-race as well, he revealed that he was giving the winnings to the Michael O'Sullivan family. So I just thought that whole first race was really wonderful, really magical. And straight away, straight out the gates, it encapsulated what the Cheltenham Festival is, which is that place for the racing community to come together, and it happened so quickly.
It was first of all, it was a wonderful performance from the horse. He won with a great deal of authority, and he's a very exciting prospect. We hope we can see him for a few seasons to come, potentially being in there as a champion hurdle contender maybe next season. But indeed, it was a wonderful gesture from the usual sponsors. And the story behind it, as you mentioned, was in itself, very touching. And on a festival that was incredibly emotional around the O'Sullivan family, which we'll come to, I'm sure, of the days after, it definitely set the tone. So yes, I'd be with you on that with Copec de Board.
If we take a look at day two, thinking about our best and our worst on the Wednesday, I'm gonna put it out there that I feel that the worst, my worst may be different to most people's, but a lot of people would perhaps call it the best, in the champion chase. So for me, it was the worst, because I really wanted Jonbon to assert himself from being a good horse being a great horse, and the Champion Chase is what many were deciphering the differential between good and great there, and he wasn't able to do it. The occasion did appear to get to him. He was very lit up in the preliminaries, and I think that showed in the race. And obviously he made that shuddering error and was, to be honest, ran well to finish second, but it wasn't to be for him. For many, it will be the best. Linking to what we just spoke about, Paul, with regards to Michael O'Sullivan, because the winner of the race was Michael O'Sullivan's 2023 Cheltenham Festival winner, Marine Nationale.
Yeah, that was an incredible emotional moment for Barry Connell, for the O'Sullivan family. I think that as far as John Bon goes, he has an issue with Cheltenham. It's not always been a happy hunting ground for him, as we know, and elsewhere he's almost unbeatable. And there's always been horses that have just not quite got it at Cheltenham. Things have just gone wrong for them almost every time. My all-time favourite horse, Wayward Lad, was like that. He was one of the great horses of his era, but he just didn't manage to get that Cheltenham win, and that might end up being the case with John Bon. Although I have to say, after that dreadful mistake that he made, and any horse can make a bad mistake, it just went wrong, I thought he did brilliantly well to get back for second. And a normal horse, even a normal Champion Chase contender, wouldn't be up to coming through to take second. So he did very well there. And again, if he goes to Punchestown or Aintree, and there's any sort of a rematch, I think we could be up for something very, very exciting. I'd also say, as far as the O'Sullivan factor goes, that Jazzy Matty winning as well was extraordinary with Marine Nationale, but that the other horse that Michael O'Sullivan had won on 2 years before for that very famous double, for him to win, and with a new trainer, Keane Collins, was hard to believe. I'm very happy because it was one of my main selections out in front, my tipping service, so that made the day for us. But for both of them to win was the stuff of dreams. It was an exceptional day two.
I think the two winning within the hour started to make you truly believe in ideas behind divine intervention, because there's just no other way to describe that happening. It was really wonderful. So yeah, potentially you can see the Champion Chase both ways. I would certainly say it leans towards the best for the emotional ties. Probably the worst, and I think certainly the worst in the eyes of Paul Townend when he was interviewed after the race. You could assign that to Ballyburn though, right? He in his post-race interview on the television, I think it was Matt Chapman asked Paul basically, that error, it went wrong, and his response was something along the lines of, no, everything had gone wrong before that too. So Ballyburn the worst performance?
Yes, Ballyburn was very, very disappointing. He just didn't turn up. I mean, full stop. Another odds-on favourite beaten. And I think in recent years, because of the domination of Woody Mullins, we've just got used to all these odds-on chances, or the vast majority winning. But this Cheltenham Festival, we came from a fairly wet winter with lots of deep ground to pretty quick ground. And it's another thing that I mentioned in the preview. The ground changes. It's a different ball game. A lot of these horses that have been flying along, even though Ballyburn is a horse that goes well on a decent surface, so many of them just didn't look to be quite the same under the conditions at Cheltenham. But that was very disappointing. One final thing I'd say about day two, and it's not a race I like normally, was the cross-country race. Stumptown's performance, for me, was the performance of a potential Grand National winner. It was a very, very good win for Gavin Cromwell, who had an amazing week. But the way he won with so much weight, I thought was very, very impressive. Stumptown.
A good best from you, Paul. I'm gonna chuck in a bet. I've chucked in a couple of worse. I'm gonna chuck in a best to join Stumptown. I'm actually going to go with the New Lion, because of the level of competition in that race, and to have the three market leaders all in contention swinging the bend for home. I think that was quite an impressive performance and got rid of that bad juju around the Challow hurdle. So there we go. We can't talk about that anymore.
No, absolutely. It was a great race. And it was one of the few races this week where all the main contenders actually got round and were in with a shout at the final obstacle. So many of the big races didn't work out. The champion hurdle, the champion chase, etc. But that was one where it came up trumps and we got a great winner, I think.
So day 3, if we let's have a little think about the best and the worst of day 3. I'm going to chuck out there, I think, the best and probably one of the best performances of the entire Cheltenham Festival meeting for me on day 3, regardless of the fact that I didn't back him, had to be Factor File.
Yeah, he was hugely impressive. I mean, that he travelled beautifully. And I mean, it was always going to be a question of when and how far. I think if you back that Factor File on day 3, you had a lovely feeling going through the race. You always seem to be going best. And clearly that is his trip. The ground conditions were perfect. It was a very, very high class performance. Yeah, outstanding effort.
And for me, the worst, where it all sort of fell apart, was Tehupu. And I wanted him to be beat. I know that sounds really horrible, but he was that banker that I thought would let the side down. Now, turns out most of them had already done that by the time we got to Tehupu. But I did not think he was going to take a second stayers hurdle. And the reason I'm actually assigning this as the worst is because the amount of times that I have sided with Bob Ollinger. And did I back him? No, I did not. So that one was the worst for me, but I was happy that it was old boy Bob that come flying home.
I mean, it was a heartwarming moment to see him come up the hill. And to be honest, from the back of the final flight, he was always going to get there. For me, in that race, I backed the Wall Park each way. I thought he was coming there to win his race off the final bend, but he just didn't quite have the class to do it. Maybe next year. But no, Tehupu, a little bit disappointing. Again, I think the faster ground, not so sure that helped him so much. But it turned into another very, very good race. For me, a heartwarming moment as well was the victory of Doddy the Great in the Pertemps. A horse that had promised a lot, then really gone into the wilderness. But Nicky Henderson apparently had said that there wasn't a lot between him and his more fancied runners. And it was great to see that horse bouncing back, because he might just go on and prove to himself to be better than a handicapper before too long.
Right, let's swing into day 4, the best and the worst of day 4. We're kicking it off with the worst, in my opinion, Paul, because to me, this just does not embody what we expect at the Cheltenham Festival. And I'm going to go with the Triumph hurdle. And that is because 100 to 1 shot, Poneros, had never jumped a hurdle in public, come flying up the hill and destroyed the hopes of anyone that had backed either Lulamba or East India Dock. You know, both were sort of at one point flip-flop favourites. In the end, it was East India Dock was, well fancied. But both of those had attracted quite a lot of market attention. And 100 to 1 shot, Poneros, trained by none other than Willie Mullins, who is the best, but in this case he was the worst. How dare you put 11 horses in the Triumph hurdle, Willie Mullins? What are you playing at? And I think just in the interest of competition, that to me was a little bit disappointing. I mean, for many it was a little bit disappointing.
Well, I suspect that, they've asked the two of us to do this show so we can give differing views and clash heads a little bit. But I'm 100% with you on this, because like you, I think that Willie Mullins is a genius. The man is a modern great trainer. He is a superstar trainer. But I think the rules have to be looked at. To have 11 runners for one trainer in a race such as this almost brings the race into disrepute. I'm sure he would say that, well, they're running for different owners and they've all got running on their merits, which I'm sure they are. But I don't think it does the race any good. I also think that having unraced horses running in a Grade 1 first time out at the Cheltenham Festival, he said in the interview that, well, I threw them in there to give them some experience, see how they do. Well, that's not what Cheltenham's about. And Poneros has produced a marvellous performance. And when you look back, as everybody does, when a shock occurs in a big race like 100-1 shot, how could it have won, everybody thinks, and goes back and looks at the form. You saw that on its last start, it was favourite for the Cambridgeshire. I mean, so this was a very smart, flat horse, but to be that good first time out over hurdles was extraordinary, even surprised the trainer. But what you say about so many runners for one trainer in a Grade 1 race, and also newcomers testing the waters in a Grade 1 race, I'm not sure that's what the Triumph Hurdle is really about.
Later in the day, we saw basically many more Willie Mullins runners and winners. Friday, I think he won all of the races except the one he perhaps really wanted to. And yes, I think that is obviously Galopin Des Champs. We can't not talk about that Gold Cup. I'm going to say it's the worst for me on day 4. Reason being, I wanted him to make history, and he just emptied. But I think it has potential to provide us with the best, because is he now going to be one of those horses like your Quarto Star, where he shows us he's as much about heart as he is class, and can he come back and regain that Gold Cup crown? I mean, I know the way you're thinking, won impressively, Paul, really, when you look at it, but it was a weak Gold Cup. And that's probably one of the worst Gold Cup fields I have seen in years.
Well, I would have probably said that with the exception of the favourite going into the race, it looked a weak Gold Cup. I agree with you there. And I would have loved to have seen Galopin Des Champs win. But I think he was beaten by 2 things in the end. I think the ground was a bit quick for him. As horses get a bit older, he's handled decent ground in the past, but as they get older, their joints, maybe they feel them a bit more, especially on a sound surface. And he never quite was moving with the fluency that he has in the past. But also, J.P. McManus, we talked about Willie Mullins being a genius. Well, I don't think there's anybody more in Irish racing than J.P. He supplemented, I know the way you're thinking. He took the view that it had been beaten 7 lengths at Leopardstown, and he still felt there was improvement to come. And when you look back, you think to yourself, well, clearly he knew that this horse was really tip-top shape. And the way he bounded away was so impressive. And he could be a real superstar in the making. And time might tell, and history might well record, that on the day, Galopin Des Champs really caught a tartar in the shape of a younger horse, I know the way you're thinking, who is on a very, very steep upward curve. I think without those 2 in the race, it was a very weak Gold Cup, absolutely. But I can't wait to see the rematch, especially if it's on easier ground.
Absolutely. That rematch, I think, the potential for the 2026 Gold Cup is probably what's come out of this race the best, because you've got Galopin Des Champs, you've got the fact that Factor File was so impressive, and now there are talks about him being in the Gold Cup. I mean, obviously that's a J.P. McManus horse, but are we going to see, I know the way you're thinking, Factor File, Galopin Des Champs going for the comeback? It could be now a way more exciting 2026 Gold Cup. So for all that we've had perhaps a bit of a lacklustre year, it could be quite exciting moving forward. Overall, Paul, if we look at the best and the worst, one thing that was discussed quite a lot was the crowds and how that was impacting the festival. On numbers, it was one of the worst. It was one of the worst attended. Obviously, we're seeing increasing dips in the numbers of fans attending, but many that went said that they felt it was actually the best, because it was some of the best service they'd had at the Cheltenham Festival in a while, in terms of ability to move around, ability to see the horses, get a drink, all those sorts of things. So the customer experience seemed to be a little bit better. Is there something to be said for what Royal Ascot have done in the past few years and actually put caps on their numbers? Or do you feel that the lack of crowds actually reduced the atmosphere?
Well, I wasn't there at Cheltenham. I just sensed the atmosphere through the broadcasts, through the television pictures. And for me, there was no atmosphere lost. I think there's definitely a case for looking into limiting the crowds. if they're not able to maybe put more staff on and more facilities in order for people to get served and not be crowded around. I think the big question is the cost as well. You know, we live in challenging times now, and I'm not so sure that spending the huge amounts of money that you're liable to pay out for 4 days at Cheltenham and the hotels that are ridiculously expensive and the expensive food and everything else. I'm just not sure that's the right combination in this day and age. But I think ideally the best thing would be to lower the prices and get more people in and be able to provide better facilities. They've done it in the past. They were able to do it in the past. I don't understand why they're not able to do it anymore. I think the whole thing needs kind of root and branch review. But you were there. You felt that there was no atmosphere lost overall, I suppose, for the big races once you're in amongst the crowd.
I wasn't there. I was the same as you. I was watching it through the television, and I think that for me, day one looked a good number. Personally, the atmosphere, especially after Kopek de Boards had won, it was pretty strong. To be honest with you, it looked, the Cheltenham of old. Day 2 and 3, you saw a noticeable drop off, and through viewing, it was very quiet. It felt quiet. Not horribly quiet. I quite like to go to the November Cheltenham meeting, and it sat around that level. And I like that personally. So I didn't really see an issue. And I wouldn't have seen an issue as being an attendant either. But in terms of what you expect from the Cheltenham Festival, at it being that little bit of a higher level than your usual Saturday racing, we've got to be honest, it wasn't that. It didn't reach those peaks. I think there's loads they can do. I've gone out there and said before, I have no idea about the economics or the viability of it all, but I think that there could be ways that the Jockey Club could look at monetizing things like their own hotels or board and ticket packages, and I'm only looking at that through things that other race courses in the UK and Ireland do. But I think there also could be something to be said for the fact that maybe having it over 4 days now is also stretching the cost in a way that perhaps people haven't really factored in the long run. Obviously, we all have the arguments for the fact that it's diluted the quality of the racing, but actually an extra day is an extra day's cost, isn't it? So if you're having to make those choices, we're seeing it in other parts of entertainment as well. So, for example, there are so many artists that are touring this year in terms of the music world, and you're seeing that certain concerts and many of the concerts aren't selling out as they perhaps usually would have. And it's because in this cost of living crisis, you can't go to all of them now. So you're having to make the choice of this artist, and this artist to come in. Which concert am I going to go to? Because I can no longer afford to do all three. And it's perhaps happening with the Cheltenham Festival. I can no longer attend to all 4 days. So I'm going to pick which days I want to go to. And, many people say they like the Tuesday. Many people say they like the Friday. And that's why we've seen the Wednesday and the Thursday dip in attendance, because people just can't afford to do all 4. Well, a great answer may be 3 days, improve quality, reduce cost.
I was just going to say, if you want to still have an increased number of races, but you understand that people, as you very eloquently pointed out, are struggling now to be there for the whole 4 days and all that the cost that it entails, would it be such a disaster to go back to a 3-day meeting, but maybe have 8 races on each of the 3 days? Would that be a disaster? I don't think so. You'd lose 4 races of the lesser events, and you just have more quality. And I think it would be much better all round, because I think stretching it out over the 4 days, I remember I used to go to the 3-day meetings at Cheltenham back in the day, and they were absolutely rammed all the time. Somehow everybody seemed to get served, and the crowds, and that's 60,000, 65,000, I can't remember what it was. Amazing crowds. I don't see why it can't be done again. I think we need to just take the corporate element down a little bit and let the people get the racing they want to see without it bankrupting them once a year in mid-March.
Absolutely. Wow. I think that's all we have time for, Paul, in terms of the best and the worst of the 2025 Cheltenham Festival. Thanks so much for joining me. Make sure you keep tuning in, guys. We will have Grand National Festival previews coming up.